Okay, thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is a stamp-along scene, and it's quite a complete scene in terms of composition, a lighting scheme, color scheme, and working out some different continuity aspects between all three areas. Okay, we have the sky, cabin, and meadow. Okay, and what I really kind of talk about a lot in this video is about the maximization of imagery and color, and how blending, or how, the utilization of color in the different areas right here can really maximize your use of the inks that you happen to have and the range you happen to have of certain hue. And by doing so, it lends itself to kind of the continuity of different areas within a scene. Specifically, this area up here is kind of more blue and I guess violets or whatnot. This cabin right here is brown, and this area right down here is green. What I do is I have you guys use the blues up here in the sky, down here in the meadow, because green, one of the components of green is blue. So you can add the blue down here, and just by overlapping that blue with some green, it creates a green meadow down here. We no longer, really see blue down here, okay? And some of that pink up here in the sky is on both the cabin and meadow. You see that little tinge of pink down here. So it's kind of reflecting, these two areas up here in theory are reflecting the colors of the light that's being cast. And I use some of this brown in the cabin down here in the meadow to strengthen some of my shadows and to give that green kind of a richer, deeper green hue, instead of going with something like only greens for grass, like something like a range like that. I don't think that looks really too realistic or very rich in terms of kind of a natural substance, growing substance. It's too hot. Not that you can't do something like that, but I like to mellow it out with a little bit of the brown tones. But by doing these different types of colors in different areas, you're really utilizing the inks that you have and trying to maximize the usage of it. But it brings everything together as well, so it works for us in many different ways. Okay. As far as the stamp along aspect, I could have done a little bit more tones up here, something like that, but the difference between a stamp along and, a scene that's a little bit more in depth is I tend to go into, maybe two more colors at least to strengthen my shadows and whatnot within a scene, and I like to kind of frame things off a little bit stronger with some darker tones on the edge. But I do think that this, as far as a kind of a compositional statement, is complete. You don't have to go with any more tones. And one of the things that I did in this one is I just threw in a few dots with a gel pen and put a couple up in the sky just to show that kind of the addition of a new texture down here and up here kind of extends that kind of visual continuity between the two sections. I could do, some highlights on top of the roof top or something like that, or on these trees, but I think as far as a stamp along video and scene, that's as complete as you need to go. So anyways, if you choose to stamp along, I hope you have a good time with that. The stamps that you'll need are some kind of tree, and I mentioned this when we get into it too. Sedge filler, I added some reeds down below, and I did this cabin with fence, okay? You don't have to have that specific cabin. If you have a different type of structure, you can use it amongst kind of a meadow, all right? But let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4 stamps. Yeah, just these 4 stamps right there. This tree on here, you might have seen it in other videos where I just use a certain portion of it, to create background trees or just smaller trees, is something that's done in this video as well. So a few different types of little exercises to go through, but mostly what I talk about is how to apply color in a nice light touch, and that way you'll avoid getting kind of any type of real harsh marks like this, okay, with the stylus tools. When people first start doing that, oftentimes they think when they start applying the color, it's not going on very strong or visible even, because we're often starting with the lightest of tones, okay? Summer sky, aqua, or whatever, so they tend to press harder. But that's definitely not the technique that you want to do. You want to just use light, very light, you know, ergonomic strokes to apply your ink onto your scenes, okay? And that way you build up that color, and then you won't get big oval shapes or whatever shape of the applicator that you're using, okay? This is a 1/4 page or a 1/4 size piece of glossy cardstock, okay? It's not photo paper, but it's glossy cardstock, okay? And we use a lot of the Memento inks on this scene. I did that specifically just because I thought more people would have Marby, but you can certainly mix and match, okay? And, I don't know, a couple distress inks in there as well. Anyways, I hope you enjoy it. If you just stamp along with it, I hope I kind of move at a good pace for you all. And I hope you enjoy the scene. And best of luck with your follow along. Drop any questions that you might have below in the comment section. Okay? Thanks for tuning in. Okay, I think it's time for another stamp along video. Let's see here. I'm going to do I don't know what kind of used to be a crowd favorite type of thing, if there was such a thing. But when we used to do, I think it was classes, it could have been make and takes or demos too, at the table when we used to do shows, was just kind of your noontime scene of, like, say, something like a cabin in a meadow with a blue sky and green grass. Okay? Something very basic. And this is going to be a simplified version, but the only difference between a simplified version of these scenes and kind of ones that are a little bit more in-depth is I tend to go into a few more colors in terms of the value range, and I'll do some special effects on it, like, you know, just a few little dots or something like that with a gel pen. But a stamp-along video, I mean, doing that type of thing on a scene is really simple, and we can do that too. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cabin right here. Okay, this one happens to be the cabin and fence. You can use, if you have a different type of structure though, you can use that in place of that. The Sedge filler, it's a grass filler stamp. This is a stamp that I'd really recommend for anyone if you don't have it. That really fills in the space around kind of meadows and any place where you would require some additional texture to kind of merge all of your different land elements together. It could even be sand, even though it has these little grassy things. If I was to do this in like a brown or something like that and add some tan tones, you know, it could easily be just some mounds of some sort of a substance, you know, earth or whatever. And I'll use the tree cluster here. Now the tree cluster is a good one to add in there. We'll show how to do it in different heights and use it for different portions of it. Okay, now a stamp along video, you know, we're doing kind of a simplified version of this, but that doesn't mean you can't color on here and use different types of tones. Okay, if you have some Marby pens or whatever, or some dye-based inks, you know, you can ink it up, color it a little bit, and you can get multicolored trees. But just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to do this in just black ink, in the spirit of the previous stamp-alongs, you know, and keeping things kind of as simplified as possible, okay? But it's really nothing to... I like to ink it up in a really dark color like this, like a black or something like that, and I like to just go in and add some little additional green, kind of maybe it would be embellishments or something like that, so that it just doesn't stamp out so monochromatic, but monochromatic looks good too. Okay, now what you're going to do on this one, because we want to do some sky in here, and we'll teach you how to do that, is I'm going to have a little bit more sky showing than maybe in some other scenes that I might do, and some other things maybe this would be higher and I'd have more meadow, okay? Quarter page cardstock, and I'm doing this on glossy cardstock in this technique. Let me make sure that I didn't... I was checking to see if I already colored something on this one. Okay, so I don't know, maybe just a little bit under midway up the card or so, because we'll feature a little bit more cloud structuring in here. Okay, and in this type of, you know, stamp along video, you're in really just about any scene that I do, you won't need a stamp positioner for this, okay? Alright, now we have our cabin stamped out. If you have a different type of structure, you'll have it in different areas. Maybe yours doesn't have the trees behind it, okay? But here's what we're going to do. We're going to stamp out the Sedge filler stamp. It's a grass texture. If you have a different kind of a texture stamp that's similar in terms of the way it's used, you can use that as well. Alright? But what I'm going to do, here's the thing. I'm going to stamp this about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 5 impressions of it. We don't have to use the entire part of it on some of these, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlap into my previous impression, okay? But I'm not going to stamp it into the cabin, okay? I don't want the texture in the cabin portion itself, but I want it surrounding it pretty carefully. Okay, now when you're stamping this, light even pressure, okay? Don't stamp it out and rock it like this, where it's getting the edges, so, you know, profoundly stamped, you know, in terms of the edge, okay? Light and pressure. Most of my pressure is in the center of this, okay, on the top of it, in a stamp like this, okay? In larger stamps where you see me kind of pressing kind of harder into it, and I'm pressing the different areas, that's because it has a lot more surface area than something, you know, a small stamp like this. So on this one here, I mean, if some of it doesn't even stamp out, it's not really going to be a big deal because it's just texture, okay? If it's something like a deer or something like that, or a doe, and, you know, the head doesn't stamp out, that's bad, you know, or a part of the body. But on something like this, if you miss it, not a big deal, okay? I like to re-ink in between impressions, just so that they're nice and uniform, okay? So we have this whole area filled in right here, okay? And don't try to match it up too perfectly, like edge to edge, like you're, you know, putting down bricks or something like that, okay? Just overlap the previous impression. You can change the angle from impression to impression just to vary it a little bit and to make it a lot more seamless, where you can't tell where one impression ends and the other begins, okay? Keep it nice and simple. We'll go with the tree cluster. If you have a different type of pine tree, you can use that as well, or really any kind of tree. What I wouldn't go for is a stamp. If you had a stamp of like a, you know, like an outline of a tree like this, you know, or something like that sort, you know, like that, okay? It'd be a little bit of a different spirit, you know, if you did something like that, rather than tonal images, okay? Alright, inked it up in black. This is the tree cluster. There's a tree cluster and a tree cluster large. This one happens to come in sets number 7. That's the larger version. And number 10, I think it is, the nature set. Alright, if you want a full impression, you can do that. Okay, let's do that, just to vary this, okay? And I'm kind of stamping this off the page. I don't want to stamp it right in front of my cabin or something like that. I'll have the full, well, almost full impression of it, okay? You can place it wherever you want. There's not a whole lot of room in its full entirety, top to bottom. I didn't, you know, I have it, this portion of it that didn't stamp out here because I didn't want to close that in from a compositional standpoint. But here we go. Here's your very advanced, I'm kidding, masking, okay? Red paper towel. And I'm just going to mask off some portions of it. If you've watched other videos, like some of my basic ones, you'll see me do this. I believe in getting kind of a real maximized usage out of your stamps. Here's my theory on stamp design, okay? If a stamp design can be stamped individually and you can do a scene from it, that's great, okay? Like say something like this. I mean, you could just stamp this individually and write happy birthday above it and whatever, you know, and it would make a full scene. Now, texture stamps aren't for that. I'm not going to do a whole scene with just that and only that. It would look kind of strange. I mean, maybe if you had a quote stamp about grass or something like that, but really not, okay? But let's say I didn't have this tree cluster stamp. I could just use the trees from this stamp again. So a stamp can be used in its entirety for a scene, but then it can also be used in conjunction with other stamps, okay? That extends its usage. But then you can also use portions of the imagery within a stamp to get different looks, okay? So I was able to repeat this pattern a lot, but the same with this tree cluster. Stamped once there, stamped in the foreground with using various portions of it, okay? And then I just stamped it in the background, like back there. But if I didn't have that, you could probably just use these trees right here. You'd get a little bit of fence, but who cares, okay? And you can stamp that. You'd mask that off. I don't want two cabins identical in the scene, but I can stamp those trees right there. See that portion? And I could have stamped it down here. Be careful that you don't, you know, I would mask this off just so I don't get that cabin again, but I could stamp that out and then get more trees, okay? All right, so that's what I call kind of a maximized usage of imagery, and that's how I try to design the stamps. Alone, repeated, and for different portions of the same design, okay? All right. The way I figure it, we only have so much space in our craft rooms, you know, and if you can get it all in, you know, like 3 usages in one design, all the better than having 3 separate designs, you know, for the, you know, for a similar purpose. Okay. So, as I'm blabbing away like that, hopefully you had a chance to get a few impressions of your trees in there. We have this grassy meadow around our cabin. All right, now just to simplify things, I mean, I could use something like the cloud cumulus in here, and that would look really good, and that would fill in our sky. If you have a moon or a sun or something like that, you can do that up there as well. But I'm going to, again, simplify this scene, and let's not put anything in the sky right now, okay? All right, now here's the color scheme I'll be working you guys through, if you're following along with the stamp long idea. I tell you what, let's go with mementos. Probably more people have mementos or other types of pads than the Marvies at this point in time, although if you really like this technique of blending your tones and layering them and whatnot, I would really recommend getting a few select colors at least of the Marvie ones, because when you start building up colors, they apply a little bit easier in terms of the amount of saturated tones, okay? But going back to the mementos, or the Adirondack lights, pick out kind of a range of maybe the light and medium tone of blue. So it could be an Adirondack light like that one, and a Memento Bahama blue. The number 10 Marvie blue looks really great, and of course the Salvia blue. But we're going to lay down some light tones right now of blue, okay? Now this is really perfect for a stamp-along video because this blue, okay, we're going to make a green meadow down here, okay? But what is the component of green? But it's blue again, okay? Now here's the thing. Okay, now if you're following along with this, what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you leave some areas of the sky white, okay? Just the color of the paper. Down in the meadow, maybe you leave a little bit of the white of the paper. You don't have to leave as much, but here I'll show you how this goes, okay? Now if you have a glossy cardstock, and like a memento or something like that, or the Ranger, the tumbled glass. I keep mentioning that color. I have to get it one of these days, but I suspect that it's fairly light, okay? But you can get a little dab of color like that and then just spread it out like so, okay? Or if you're worried about it leaving too harsh of a mark, then don't dab it down too much like that. Just kind of get it going, all right? Sort of from the outside edge in. Now here's what I'm doing here. See this? This is a nice ergonomic motion of my hand. So I'm getting the left-hand side of the paper. I've now turned this. You don't always have to have it right side up and work on everything like right side up, okay? Just turn it like this, and this makes for a much easier, more graceful stroke, okay? If your trees are smearing a touch because the black ink hasn't dried, you can heat set it a little bit. Mine's smearing a little bit. I'm not really worried about it, okay? But now here, going back to the angle of the paper, I'm going to turn it again, go like this. Okay, now this is where you start potentially getting rid of the white of the paper, okay? But be careful now, okay? See that? Just a few little strokes really fills in that whole area, and I have this little area that's still open. I'm going to reiterate this same type of thing, but down here, okay? So leave a little bit of area light, okay? So what it'll look like is a little bit of light in the sky, and you'll have a little bit of reflected light down below, okay? This is easy to do. It's easier to do than filling in the whole area. I'm getting some smearing from these trees down here. I'm not worried about it though, okay? But what this will look like is a little bit of light coming from the sky, and then there'll be some reflected light down in the meadow, okay? And it just means you don't color as much, okay? Some people find that lighting is hard, okay? And I understand what they're doing, because as they get into it, they get into the spirit of color application, and they're thinking about coloring in the whole area, okay? But see this right here? That is kind of the beginning of your light direction, just leaving some as is. So just do less coloring and you'll have your lighting scheme, okay? See that? All right, now here's the thing. Here's the thing I did in one of my previous videos. It's not sometimes about coverage, okay? I have a good amount of ink here, here, and here, okay? In terms of coloring it side to side, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a little bit of extra ink, especially on the surrounding area. And what that does is it builds up the intensity of that given ink by just adding more of it, okay? But it also kind of lubricates the page slightly, okay? I'm getting the paper a little bit more moist for the other colors to come after it by having the initial color laid down in a really good saturation, so it's not only coverage, but it's about a buildup of that color. It'll make the other colors easier to swipe in, okay? Now I'm not going to have that meadow down here blue, although it certainly could be, okay, if it's kind of a cold winter scene or something like that. But that blue overlap with green will make that, it'll bring that area down there to life in terms of my greens, okay? Alright, so that's enough of that blue. Use whatever color you're going with. Go for about 2 or 3 coats of it. And even if you get coverage, okay, I see blue there, add some more on top of it, okay? So it's about building up some of it. It's not going to get any darker after a certain point, but we want it somewhat slick and moist. Okay? I'm going to go with my Bahama blue. And where do you add that? Well, you add it basically in the same area that you did with your previous color. Do you add it in the area that's light? No. Okay? So, add it on, but maybe don't go quite as far into this area as you did with the lighter blue. That way you have a little more of a transition, okay? Alright, so that means that that lightest blue was the most coverage that you'll have with any color, okay? So just stay out here a little bit longer. See how light my touch is too? I'm just barely touching the page. I'm going over it in repetition though. Okay? So what it looks like on a blank piece of paper is this. Okay, but see where I'm doing that? The edge of my card is probably more like right here, okay? So this is what I'm doing right here. So some of it is off and some of it's on. That's what I'm doing. I'm wiping it on like that. And see how nice that sky is so far? All right? Okay. I'm adding it down into the meadow as well, because a darker blue overlapped with green or yellow or whatever will make a darker green. And by putting in a common color between the sky and the meadow, you'll give these two areas something in common, which creates a little bit of continuity. Okay, now here's your trick here. What I want you to do, after you've kind of wiped this in here a little bit, okay, and I'm doing that a few times, you don't need to keep re-inking if you have, you know, a reasonably juicy ink pad, okay? After you do that a while, just keep doing it and get some of that ink off of your wand, okay? Now here's the thing too, as I'm doing this, I'm just kind of staying in one area. I'm not working like this, okay? You just kind of work in one area, and then you go down to the next area, okay? Don't do this. That's when people get these kind of choppy marks on there, okay? Alright, now here's the thing. I like a little bit of a shadow on my cabin, or at the base of the cabin, so kind of tilt your tool or sponge or whatever you're working and kind of go for a little bit of a narrow swipe and put a little bit of that color at the base of the cabin. What that will do is it'll create a little bit of a shadow, which gives the object a bit of visual weight. You can put some underneath your trees as well. All right. Now, let's start addressing some of this meadow area down here. We're going to do the cabin, but we'll do that later. Okay. Let's see what types of greens we have. Okay, here's a Memento Pear Tart, peeled paint from Distress Ink. There's a Marvy Pale Green. Light green. Light green's really, really vibrant. Be careful if you use that one, although I love it in grass, but it's very bright, vibrant. What I want you to do, the thing that these three all have in common is they're fairly light. A couple of them are more yellow-green than kind of a diffused green. But now you can switch tips if you want to. If you don't want to get some of that blue in your pads, you can do that. But let's start off with some of our lighter greens. Let's try this Memento Pear Tart first, okay? I never know what color, you know, these combinations will create, so I just kind of lightly dab it in there like that. Use the same touch that you used with your other colors. Now I can come into this lighter area just a little bit, but retain some of the lightness of it though too. See that? See how that's changing kind of the spirit of that blue down there? I can put some of it in this background as well. It's turning it more turquoise because we've added a little bit of green, yellow green, to that blue so far. I'm just running this green along these trees here in the foreground. I can just run it right over the whole thing, okay? Okay, but here's a little bit of green laid down. That was the Pear Tart, okay? Let's try peeled paint, okay? Peeled paint might be a little bit darker than the Pear Tart, I think, and I'm laying it down basically where I just laid down the Pear Tart, okay? It's not a precarious thing. There's plenty of tolerance, you might say, as far as your placement of it goes, okay? See that, how it's doing that? It's kind of starting to change the look of that area down there. It's adding a warmer tone. I have a little bit of that white there. I almost got rid of all of it. So I too have to kind of you know, throw the brakes on, so to speak, a lot of times when I'm doing it. That's enough of the peeled paint, I think. You can see how easy this is going on. Alright? Don't be one of those people that says, oh, that's easy for me to say. Just keep it nice and light, okay? Where am I putting some of this darker green? This is a cottage ivy. It would be similar to, I don't know, just a basic green, your Christmas green or something like that. And I'm just adding, I'm just doing this little type of technique right here, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect either because I'm not doing it on a white piece of paper. I'm just adding it down here into the grass. And do a light touch, okay? Whenever you do, if I did, you know, this touch right here, that's precarious, okay? That's a little bit harder to work with, you know, if you're doing something like this. Don't go heavy-handed. What I'm doing is even if I ink this up all the way, this is really juicy right now. If I just do a light touch like this, see this? See that? It's just a light touch, just like barely kissing the page. Imagine you're applying these inks to, I don't know, a baby's face or something like that, okay? And you're putting a little bit of, you know, maybe not a baby's face or something like that. Maybe it's a little toddler and you're putting some makeup on them for, you know, Halloween or something like that, okay? They want to go out, they wanted to dress up like a, I don't know, a princess or something like that, or something of that sort. Imagine that touch, you know, you want to jab it into them, you know, if you want it darker, you want to just kind of put it on gently, okay? I'm putting a little bit around this tree in the background to create a little bit of a shadow at the base of the tree. See this? I'll do it here. I'll do it like this. And that's the touch you're going after. You don't want to rush things by squeezing out a bunch of ink, you know, and into an area, given area. Now sometimes, I mean, I squeeze out a little ink to, you know, cover vast fields with the lightest of tones, but, you know, not something like this. I don't want to put a shadow down at the base of that, like that, okay? That's what, you know, people run into if you just use things too quickly, okay? So it's more like this, okay? See this? Let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Anyways, you see, that's 30 swipes with a lighter touch to get to that value of green. Now, I know I squeezed some of it out right there, you know, but this is kind of what you want to go after. You want to go after repetition, all right? And that's what'll make... I say that because I saw it all the time in my workshops. You know, someone sees a finished scene like this, they want to get to that green really fast, so they might use a light green. Applying, they say, wait a minute, it's not going on, or something like that. Or it's too light, I need to use more pressure. And that's just, you know, it's the natural kind of inclination, you might say. Okay, that's the green. Now let's move on to, I hope I have a clean stylus head here. I think that's clean enough. All right, let's add a little bit of visual interest to that sky. All right, a couple of different things you can do. I don't want to add green up there. I could, but just to give it a little bit of variation. Do you guys have a very pale pink in your selection of pads? If you do, grab it, okay? Something like the rose pink or rosemary would really work great from Marvy. If you have, I don't have a big selection of really light pinks other than my Marvy ones, I don't think. There's a couple Adirondack lights, but a lot of people don't have those, so this pad is in need of changing. See that right there? The rosemary tends to kind of break down faster, but this is a 20-year-old pad probably, because, you know, this doesn't have kind of the newer tops on it. These stickers were probably easier for them to do and made it more colorful than the gold embossed ones at some point in time, so they switched out, you know, but they switched out to these ones a long time ago. So, but this pad here, I wouldn't make impressions with it, but I can still use it for my color. Okay? Alright, this is a very pale pink. What I don't want is a super bright version, so I'm going to go with a very light one, okay? And let's add a little bit of variation up here, okay? Light touch, okay? And where I kind of, this is a really old pad, I think, too. But where I come in to my white, it reads more as purple, okay? And where I run some of this pink into the blue, it's more purple. Or I should say, yeah, is that what I said? Yeah, pink over purple. I mean, pink over blue equals purple. And then see where I'm running. This is where I also kept some of that area and said, okay, keep some of your white of the paper, so you can get, I wanted you to get a little bit of variation when you ran some tone into it. Something like a pale orange or something like that. Very pale orange would look, you know, nice as well. It would warm the sky slightly. But see, this is kind of your very friendly, charming look, you know, something like that. But here's one of those things that I do too, okay? Just to keep things a little bit more interesting in terms of a continuity standpoint, what I like to do with a very dry pink or whatever, sometimes I like to use some of this pink down here, not in full saturation, okay? It's very, very dry on this at this point in time. And see that little glow that's happening down there in the grass? It's very pale, but see how it creates a little bit of a relationship between this grass and the colors of the sky. Let's add a little bit to this cabin as well, okay? Because there's some pretty distinct, you know, distinctive regions here. We have sky as a big field of blue and purple. We have this area of green, and we have the cabin right here, okay? So I put a little bit of that pink here in this cabin and down here, okay? Now it doesn't mean I want to take some greens from down here and put them up in the sky. They already have some continuity because there's the same blues up here as down here, all right? But let's take a look at our cabin now, okay? Now instead of just seeing that cabin as, okay, I'm going to make a wooden cabin. Let's just make it brown, all right? Let's think of that cabin as a three-dimensional object, okay? Now let me pull some distress inks out too. Distress inks are a nice range of kind of earthy, brownish. Oh, I thought I had them up on my wall. I have them right here on my desk, okay? There's various values of brown, okay? Now a lot of you have some distress inks, so why don't I start off with some of those, okay? Let's see here. Let me clean off my tip here. I don't have a clean tip on my desk anymore. I just sprayed some water in a paper towel. And what I do is I just kind of press my tip into it like this. Oh, where's all the pink coming out of that? Huh, I don't know. Magic. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at my cabin as a three-dimensional object, okay? Meaning, okay, like this pad here, okay, I have this, it's kind of top lit, you know, so I have the light, I have light coming from both sides, but top lit and the side of it is darker, right? You can see this color indexing here on this case, lighter on the top, a darker version of it on the side. And that's the way we can see this cabin as well. All right, but instead of coloring just the top with this light color and the darker version on the side, okay? Do the lighter version all over it. Okay, now this happens to be an antique linen color, okay? Oh, this is what I like to do too. I like to run some of that brown down in my grassy area as well, okay? Now this antique linen is very, very light in value, okay? But I like that kind of earthy tone down here in the grass. You can put a lot of it too if you want to, okay? Alright, but see how this is covering the entire cabin? Roof, sides, whatever. Now, what I'll do is I'll take a darker version. Let's take the tea dye. If you were doing it Marvies, I would have started off like a pale orange. And this brown could be used on the side, but let's think about the vertical sides of this cabin now, okay? And I'm adding this to the vertical sides. Okay, so say the side of the cabin now is darker than the top. I can get a little bit of this color up here, but I want to change the I want to differentiate the planes, different planes of the cabin. This one's a walnut stain. As far as the colors that I have of the Distress inks, this is the darker one. Okay, now what I'm doing here is, you can kind of do half and half. You can do a little bit of dark underneath, like that. And what I was doing, again, is that little mark like this, okay? See that? I'm not going like this with the thing. That's not as easy to control, that big space on a small object like this. So I'm doing these types of marks like that, okay? See that? So you can hardly ever do, this is the thing too, when you're doing these. This is one of the darker browns that I'm working with, right? If I just do a little bit of a swipe like this, it's really hard to mess up a scene, okay? Like, you're not going to go like this. Oh my god, I messed up the scene, you know, something like that. But if you go like this, and you don't like it, that's harder to remove than this, okay? Well, you're not removing it, but you're just kind of blending it in, okay? So let me show you where this comes into play. I'm just kind of, see that? I'm just lightly dabbing it into this area right here, okay? It's just, it's a lighter touch. It's not a precarious one or anything like that. Okay, now, I think that's just too much of a differentiation between the rooftop and the cabin. So, let's get a little bit of this color on here, but I don't have to do that, you know, mark on top here. Let's just go in and it's almost like dry brushing. It's just barely putting on a little bit of color, and it's building it up. You can do a couple strokes with that. If you like it, then you can add more. But here's the thing too. Here's what you want to just make sure that when you start adding some colors, it's like, okay, I like it. Kind of take a look at it and see how it's looking, because it's easy just to tone the whole thing out again, okay? Alright, we added a little bit of brown down here. Why don't I add a little bit of brown down underneath some of these trees to create a little bit of a shadow, and to give the meadow, the grassy area, a little bit more kind of a rich hue. It's not just so green, it's kind of multifaceted. And in terms of the hue that's being used on here, okay? This is the back of the cabin, adding some more brown to that. Okay, so what we have is that right now. Okay? That looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do here, if you have this reed stamp or some other type of foreground image, you can use it or you don't have to. I'm just going to do it in black. It has to be as dark or darker than the background, okay? Just stamping it right over that foreground tree. But now, the tree instead of being kind of closer to you, is a little bit farther back. So I'm creating another layer of depth. And see this, every time I do it, I'm kind of re-inking and I'm changing the angle sometime. Stamping it a little bit lower or higher to give it a different feel, so it doesn't look like, oh, there, you've stamped out the reeds 5 times. It just looks like grass in the foreground. Okay? So there you have it. If you did it, stamped along. In this one, I'm just talking more about kind of the touch, you know, that you do in terms of building up colors slower than faster, which gives you more control. And it gives, inevitably, it gives you kind of more of the look, I think, that most people are going after. Now, if you have any type of gel pen, or paint pen, or glitter pen, or something like that, these are fun little things you can do, okay? This is a pretty good looking scene, just as is, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See this right here? I'm kind of grouping these little flowers together, like this a little bit. And if you kind of group them like that, it looks a little bit more realistic. Everyone, when they do this, they kind of space their dots apart, like perfectly, okay? I think it's a little bit more like groupings or random. It's like a little pearly everlasting or something like that. If you have pink or something like that, you can use that. These really stand out in the darker areas, so maybe don't use so much of it in the darker area. All right, now let's say this is, let's say this is dusk, all right? Now, there probably wouldn't be a reason with this type of lighting for this, but how about, you know, first couple stars of the night or something like that. Or maybe it's dawn or something like that, and you still see a couple residual stars up there in the sky. But you that just that little bit of added texture is something else. You've given continuity to, from your sky to your meadow in terms of having the blues down here, but you've also taken a little bit of that pink down here and put it into that open area. It'll only read as pink if you retained some of that white of the paper down here. If it's all green, pink over green isn't going to read as green, okay? And you've given continuity between these two areas and the cabin by bringing some of that pink into the cabin, okay? And you've given that cabin and the trees, meadow, some continuity by bringing some of that brown into this area right here, just so it doesn't look like, you know, like a day glow green, you know, meadow or something like that. I think it looks a little bit more rich this way by adding some of those shadows underneath there. So that all being said, is so you don't have to keep your different areas, sky, you know, blue sky, brown cabin, green meadow, all completely separate color schemes, okay? You reiterate it, and what does that do? Okay, we want kind of multiple usages of stamps and designs. You want to be able to use certain portions of it. You want to be able to repeat the things, okay? That gives us a lot of use of imagery, okay? This is that same tree used in the background, etc. But what this also does in terms of the color scheme is that, let's say I don't have a huge range of greens or something. I can use the blues up here and add them down here to get my value, and by adding a couple different tones of green in here, I didn't have to go in with 3 or 4 or whatever I ended up using, but if you add a little bit of green to your blues, it'll change that blue to a green because of the, you know, the overlapping of these dye-based inks and the transparent aspect of them. So you can get a lot more mileage out of your colors. If you don't have oranges, you can lay down a yellow and yet lay down a red on top of it, or a pink, and that'll look orange, okay? So all this being said is it's kind of a it's an approach to colors and stamping that, is meant to maximize exactly what you have or what you have to get in order to achieve certain different, types of looks, okay? There are certain colors that are kind of off on their own, like the browns right here, but you can certainly mix and match. A lot of people love those distress inks, because of the antique type of look. You can add some of that down in there. And if you want to get a little bit of a different look, you could have added some distress ink up here, which would give that blue a different type of color scheme up there. All right? So, play around with those things, take advantage of the transparent aspects of inks, and you can really maximize your kind of abilities to achieve different types of color schemes. And by mixing, by layering them, I should say, colors over colors, you can really give continuity to the different portions of a scene. All right. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed doing that. If you stamped along with me, you ought to, I don't know, if you had any types of questions, write them down in the comment section or just send us an email. And we'll get to answering that. Little white pen down here, right? It represents flowers and stars. So, we're maximizing the usage of that in a very simplified form in terms of a little dot, but that also gives continuity to those two different areas. We can do other things as far as like highlighting, but we'll not, let's not get around to doing that. Otherwise, we're moving it away from kind of the concept of the stamp along. So anyway, thanks so much for tuning in and stamping along with me. This was a fun little scene, and one that I always like to do, in terms of that pink up there and on the cabin and meadow. I always thought it looked really nice down here in terms of a subtle hint.